Greetings, students. Welcome to another edition of The Professor Travel. I am The Professor Travel, welcoming you to this vlog and podcast. Like always, we try to learn more about various different destinations all over the world. We share them as a community. We continue to try and travel as much as possible in order to get a flavor for what is out there. And then on top of that, we bring back the enjoyment to the rest of the community. You can always reach me on my social media forums at my website, which is theprofessortravel.com. You can also find me on YouTube at The Professor Travel. Same with Facebook and Instagram. You can also find me on Twitter at TheProfessorTR1. And then, of course, find me on Blogspot at The Professor Travel. Today, we have a wonderful visiting professor and a good dear friend and colleague of mine, Professor Morissa Pawl-Frederico. Hello, how are you?
Very nice, very good. How are you doing, Scott?
Oh, I'm doing great. Welcome to the show here. I wanted to get a little bit, and just so my viewers are aware, can you give them a little bit of background on yourself, your credentials, and a little bit more about some of the big places that you've been to?
You bet. Well, I actually am a professor. That is my second career, I guess you could say, maybe third. I'm not really sure. I'm a professor of business. I teach all sorts of international business and a variety of things. I spent 25 years plus in the travel and tourism industry. So during that time, I got to travel quite a bit. I traveled all over the world, and I've hit every continent except for Antarctica, which is on the list for the next year or two.
Oh, wow. Very nice. So you just recently got back from a really interesting trip to Iceland. Is that correct?
I did indeed. And it was fantastic.
Awesome. Well, I know my viewers would love to learn a little bit more about that. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you selected Iceland and what some of the pre-planning was that went into that?
You bet. Well, I'm going to be really frank with you. One of the reasons I wanted to go to Iceland, but one of the reasons was because there was a nonstop flight out of Portland. So that was a motivating factor. But also, yeah, we do what we can, to get nonstop flights. But it's a very interesting country, and I'd heard that it was a place to see. Although it is very expensive, probably one of the most expensive countries I've ever been to. Well, worth it though, by far. And some of the pre-planning, because this was somewhat of a last-minute trip, when I do my pre-planning, I do a lot of investigation on the internet, and that's where I start, is by looking on the internet, looking at blogs. I do look at tour books just to get a feel for, what's out there and what's going on, and maybe some of the, don't miss things. But that's really all I do. So I started probably about a month and a half, planning a month and a half before I went.
Wow, that is a really short planning time window. That's very impressive. A couple of things I wanted to ask you about. Number one, I was reading up on an article earlier today about some of the nicest places to visit, or more specifically, the places where tourists are the most welcome. And Iceland came really high on that list. Did you have a wonderful experience in meeting with the people and enjoying the culture over there?
Absolutely. I must say, especially a woman traveling alone, and I rented a car, so I don't do tours. So I was really out there on my own. And it is perhaps the safest country I have ever been to. At no time did I feel even the slightest bit of discomfort.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know, especially for my travelers who are interested in this. Because, we hear a lot, and actually it's been, I would say, relatively recent. We've only heard probably within the last few years that Iceland is a huge stop, at least for whether you're going there as a final destination or if you're going there like as a midway stop to maybe going to other locations within Europe. And that seems to be something that's been emerging.
Absolutely. It's become quite popular. It's been the thought process behind Iceland's tourism bureau, because Iceland Air, is subsidized by the government, but they offer a free stop. And so if you're taking Iceland Air to other points in Europe, which most people are, you can actually have a free stop there. And that gives people, you know, kind of a taste of Iceland, which is really nice. And that's where they're getting so much of their tourism, aside from people just making that now a final destination.
Just out of curiosity, have you also traveled using other low-cost carriers? I keep hearing about Ryanair and some other ones that are off in Europe.
No.
Okay.
Not a fan. I'm not a fan.
Okay.
Not a fan of low-cost carriers. I am a points fan, shall we say, to use really polite words. And Iceland Air happens to give me points on Alaska Air. Which is, yeah, that's a really important thing for me, that when I'm flying that I can get points, accrue points, because I do have status on Alaska Air, and Iceland Air happens to be one that is a partner.
Excellent. Good to know. And I did not know that. I actually have an Alaska Air account myself. And so it's really good to know that, so that way if I do want to travel over there. And by the way, Reykjavik is on one of my bucket to-do lists. So I definitely want to.
I think it should be for everybody. Honestly, it's really, it exceeded my expectations. I'm going to say that.
Wow, nice to know. Now, for those of us who are not really familiar with Iceland, in the pre-planning process, were there any things that we would need to know ahead of time? For example, do we need to have a visa? Are there travel medications? Do we need to adjust to a dietary regimen? What do we need to know about pre-planning for Iceland?
One of the beautiful things about Iceland is there's very little pre-planning required. You don't need a visa as a U.S. citizen. There are no medications you need to take. You can drink the water. In fact, I encourage you to do so. Excuse me, I encourage you to do so because it's glacial water, so it's probably the cleanest water on Earth. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
One of the things that I do suggest people do is make sure they're dressed appropriately.
Okay. And that actually transitions into the pre-packing. So when you were pre-packing for this trip, what type of stuff did you need to have? Is it, I would imagine it's probably pretty cold there, but is it cold all year round?
It's not. During the summer, it's very pleasant. I wouldn't advise going during the summer, though, to be quite honest. And let me tell you why. Summertime, you're going to be inundated with tourists. In order to actually plan a trip for Iceland during the summer, there you're going to need to plan probably a year in advance, because Iceland does not have the infrastructure. It doesn't have a lot of hotels. It has a lot of homestays and Airbnbs and things like that, but even those are expensive and do get booked up during summer.
Okay.
I went in shoulder season in September, and it was a lot easier.
Now,
bear that in mind. Sorry?
I was going to say, for the uninitiated, what exactly does shoulder season mean?
Okay, good question. Shoulder season means it's not off season, but it's not busy season. So it's kind of that in between. It's really a sweet spot. It's when I prefer to travel, no matter where I go. I prefer shoulder season.
Nice. Okay, perfect. Now, so you got your gear on, you're ready to go. How much did you bring with you, like package-wise? Because I've seen really inexpensive flights that can go to Iceland, but you can only bring maybe something the size of a backpack or
right, carry on. Exactly. I wouldn't advise doing that particular ticket. I bought my ticket through American Express Travel, which is what I typically use because I want points.
Sure.
And they won't even sell the ticket that doesn't allow any check-in baggage. So I would always suggest going the one tier up, which is allowing you a check-in bag. And that's all you really need. You don't need a massive bag. It's a 50-pound bag. I didn't even come close to 50 pounds. And that's with, a nice rain jacket, a winter type jacket. You want layers. It's really important in Iceland to have layers, because I mean, I come from a colder climate up in Portland, Oregon, and I'm used to it. So there were a lot of people, you know, from India and the Middle East and what have you that were bundled up like it was the dead of winter and I was wearing a t-shirt. So it's really all relative. But you do need to have layers. You need to have, you know, and that can bulk up your suitcase. But, you know, one good sweater, I chose alpaca socks and alpaca sweater because they're light and they're warmer than wool, your traditional wool. So that's, you know, that's one thing I would advise. I had an alpaca beanie, which was more than warm enough. And one thing, you know, it depends on what someone's going for. If they happen to get the chance to see the aurora borealis, the northern lights, they're going to want definitely to have some good gloves. So, and perhaps some, you know, I had merino wool under, you know, first layer, bottom layer, but I never wore it because I, you know, again, come from a colder climate and I'm not so worried about it.
Do you need a scarf there too?
Yeah, I would advise just a little scarf if you go out at night. I mean, if you're going in the dead of winter, that's a whole different ball game. I wouldn't advise anybody going for the first time to go in the dead of winter. It is in the Arctic region, so it is going to be, you know, very cold. If you're going in summer or you're going in a shoulder season, yeah, you probably won't wear it unless you go out late at night, but it's better to have it and not need it. You don't want to have to buy it there. It's expensive.
Is the shoulder season usually the best time to see the aurora borealis?
That's a really good question. Shoulder season is really when the aurora borealis starts coming out.
Okay.
Starts coming out end of August. Really, that's a little early. I chose, in particular, the autumn equinox to go, okay, because that happens to be a time when the aurora borealis is going to be more active. Okay. But it's, again, it's, you know, to let your viewers know, it's nature. Don't plan on going with the idea that you're going to see the aurora borealis, because if there are any clouds in the sky, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, you can't plan for nature. You can plan.
Can't plan for nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And perfect example. I'm going to be traveling to the Caribbean in springtime. It's going to be my first cruise going to the Caribbean, and obviously that place is notorious for hurricanes. And so, as a precautionary measure, I'm going to be purchasing travel insurance just so I can recoup some of my loss should the situation happen. It's always good to mitigate some of those things. I mean, there's some things that you can mitigate, but not everything. And nature will take its toll on wherever you travel. You can go to Japan, and then I spoke with someone a few years ago who went to Japan when they had the tsunami, and it's like, oh goodness gracious, what a time to go there! Crazy. The other thing, since we're going to be transitioning into flights, one thing I do want to talk to my guests really quick, my students, about is, when you are looking at airfare, keep in mind those low-cost fares, even though you may say to yourself, hey, I can travel with a backpack, that's not going to be an issue for me. Maybe I'll have a washer and dryer over there and it's not a big deal. Keep in mind, if there is a cancellation policy restriction on those flights also, that could bite you in the rear end. So just be precautious on that. Now, the other thing I want to also talk about is which airport you left from, and what the parking situation was. Where did you end up leaving from, and what was the parking situation?
Well, I fly out of Portland International Airport, which always ranks like one of the top airports in the country, so very proud there. And there's a reason for that. I rarely park at the airport. Okay. We have a train, the MAX train, that literally ends at the terminal. I mean, awesome. You don't even have to walk from the train station to the airport. It is right there at the airport. So that's really the only way I go. I will park at the airport if I'm going on a short weekend, taking my little pup with me on a domestic trip. Here he is.
Oh, hi.
He likes to travel domestically. But you know, and the parking situation is very, very simple. But and part of the reason it's very simple and easy to navigate is because most people do take the train. It's just very convenient.
You actually brought up a really interesting topic that I wasn't aware we could touch on, but since you mentioned something to that extent, I want to veer off topic for just a quick second to talk about your dog and why you wouldn't necessarily want to bring an animal on an international flight. There are quarantine issues that go along with that, and so you may think to yourself, "Oh, I want to bring my travel companion with me," or maybe you have a service animal. There might be some things that you need to consider ahead of time before doing something like that. So, is that one of the reasons that you wouldn't necessarily bring your companion with you?
Absolutely. I do bring him domestically, and not everywhere, but I have brought him, as far as the East Coast with me before. But internationally, there are just too many regulations, country by country, to have to deal with it. And like you said, some require extensive quarantines. Britain requires a 6-month quarantine, so it's just not worth it. It's leave the pup at home. They're going to be happier. You're going to be happier. It's just something I wouldn't advise doing.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the flights. Icelandic Air. How was the flight? What kind of seating did you have? How were the meals? And how long was the trip?
They're efficient. The airline itself is fine. Plenty of entertainment, free entertainment. The food is not free. Interestingly enough, from Portland. It's a 7.5 to 8 hour trip. The food is for purchase. It's one of the drawbacks of doing a low cost airline. However, they don't have any regulation against you bringing something on board with you, so that's not a problem. Or you can buy their food. You can buy it ahead of time. You can buy it, on the spot. It's not a problem. It wasn't. Yeah, I mean, it's considering it's you're going on vacation. You want to buy something. The food was not bad. Excuse me. On the way back, I had like a French bread pizza, even though it was not in my diet plan. But it was tasty. It was tasty, and it was fine. It was, yes, way overpriced, but you're on an airline, you're a captive, audience member. What can you do?
That's true. I recently went to Europe, and I flew through Norwegian Air, actually. I flew from LAX to Venice via Stockholm, so it was quite a distance in order to do that. But it was a very similar situation. I mean, we did get a lunch and a breakfast the next day, which was great. But if you wanted snacks in the meantime, if you wanted other things, they had those for purchase. And the one thing about Norwegian Airline, at least, was that they had unlimited alcohol. So if you wanted wines or beer, it was all free. Sparkling wine too. I mean, it was just like really amazing. So if anybody's looking into something a little bit more than Coach, I highly recommend them. And again, they're not paying me for this. I really had a good experience with them. So it sounds like you had a really, it was an efficient trip. Again,
I would fly them again, because I have no problem with those things. Yeah. If someone does have a problem with that, then choose something else. But that's the one thing that's a problem with Iceland Air. But again, for me, not a big deal.
Question for you. Do you have to purchase food past the security checkpoints in airports, or can you bring food? Okay, so it is very restricted. I never knew myself. Because I mean, there's some. Yeah. I've been to Portland, so I go to Portland a couple times per year for business, and they have a donut chain in Portland that do not have in other spots of the world. It is very interesting and very, very dynamic. It's called Voodoo Donuts. It's really interesting. I like it a lot, and it's very creative. So
I got to tell you, only tourists buy Voodoo Donuts.
I'm a tourist. I enjoy the experience. So, but yes.
Well, one thing I will tell you about Portland Airport again, and I'm from LA, and LAX, just a cesspool. But Portland Airport is so fantastic. They have kind of a rule. They don't have host international, your typical fare. all of the restaurants and food places in Portland Airport are from local restaurants that are actually in the city of Portland. They're annexes. And they have not raised their prices above Main Street Portland prices. That's one of the rules. They can't. So when you're getting something to take on board at Portland Airport, grab anything. There are so many things to choose from. They all do takeaway that you can bring on the airplane, and just fantastic food. I mean, Portland is a foodie city, so highly recommended.
There was two other things I was thinking about mentioning about the Portland Airport specifically that's also relatively unique, just in case my travelers are ever up in that area. Number one, it's one of the few airports I've been to where not only do you see domestic and international flights, but sometimes you'll actually see military flights coming into the airport as well. I was really quite amazed to see fighter jets coming into the airport. And I was like, what is that? So that's something definitely worth seeing that's a little different than there. And then the other thing, a couple of times when I've been to the airport, they've had students from the University of Portland, and oftentimes they're musicians who will be performing inside the airport. So you get a free concert of various different instrumentals throughout different spots of the airport. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, Portland Airport is really fascinating. It's a microcosm of Portland itself. There are musicians. There's even a movie theater. The historic Hollywood movie theater put a small annex in the terminal after, past security, where you can go and watch short subject films. It's free. You just go in and sit down, watch short subject films. Yes, the military, I was there one time when the fighter jets were taking off and the entire terminal shook, but everybody was glued to the windows because it was kind of majestic to watch, actually. And it is one of the few airports in the country that has military jets also stationed there. So it's really a fascinating airport.
Excellent. So you finally arrive in your destination location, or your destination airport. Is that Reykjavik?
Reykjavik, yes.
Okay. Now, did you actually stay directly in Reykjavik? Did you have any pre-vacation destination locations? How did that work out for you?
I did not stay in Reykjavik when I first got there. Most people do. I chose not to because I don't like doing what most people do. I arrived, you get in about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. I headed straight for the rental car line, which, getting your rental car always takes a bit of time. All the flights are arriving at the same time. Grabbed my rental car and hit the road. And I didn't stay in Reykjavik until the end of my trip. I chose to get out of town first thing.
Excellent. And did you go through, with your initial accommodations, was that through Airbnb? Was it through a hotel chain? How do you typically reserve your rooms?
I typically do Airbnb. I'm a super host myself here in Portland, so I get it. I get how it works, and I really, really like it. Also, in a country like Iceland with limited hotel availability, something like Airbnb is going to be your best bet.
Great idea. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Now the first night, just to throw this out there, the very first night I ended up having to stay in a hotel. And again, everything is very expensive there. But the hotel was a little over $100, which to me was reasonable. And it was right across from the geyser,
Springs.
The original Old Faithful, I should say, where we get the word. It's where we get the word geyser from. That's what it's called, and there were three different categories in this hotel. I wanted the least expensive. They were cabins, like duplex cabins, absolutely lovely. Highly recommend it.
Excellent. So let's talk about your itinerary. I'm really curious. Where are the places that you went on this excursion?
Well, some people do too much in too little time, and I don't advise that. I tend to want a little bit more immersion. So you can do the entire ring road, and the entire ring road, which is it's Iceland's road. It's, you know, really their only road. It's Highway 1. It's a 2-lane, you know, double carriageway, a very small road. It looks like a rural road, but it is their highway. And you can literally, if you just drove that, you could do the entire country in 12 hours.
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the population of Iceland is 339 odd thousand people. So it's inconceivable. I know you know, I live in the suburbs of Portland, and I think we have more people here.
I live in Orange County, California, and we easily have more than that in our area.
Los Angeles, I think, has 11 million.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So yeah, it's mind-boggling. So yes, you can do that. Don't do that. I had 6 days. I concentrated on the south and the southeast ring road. Next time I go, I'll be going back next September with my wife on the way to a wedding in London, and we're going to do the north, and that way we'll see a different part. But yeah, so I concentrated because there's so much to see. You're not going to just get in a car and drive. You're going to be stopping. You're going to be looking. You're going to be experiencing, and don't shortchange yourself.
Now, you're a photographer by nature. I mean,
Yeah.
apart from being a professor, you also have
Yeah.
beautiful pictures, and we're going to give our viewers a sneak peek of those in just a second. But you have some amazing photography. So from your perspective, and based on many of the destinations that you've been to throughout the world over the years that you've traveled, would you say from a nature standpoint, this is probably one of the best locations?
Oh, top 5.
Okay.
Easily top 5. I consider myself a cultural photographer. That's really what I go by. As far as photographing culture, there was less to photograph. As far as photographing nature, I don't think my camera ever left my hand. It just, you know, there's everywhere you look, to the right, to the left, there's just something gorgeous to take a photograph of. It's stunning.
Beautiful.
It's unspoiled, and that's the catch.
Okay. So you'll never get the same picture twice, basically.
No, you wouldn't, because everything is so vibrant and alive. It's, you know, it's constantly changing and evolving. I mean, this is a country that was formed as an island from volcanic eruption, from the 2 tectonic plates splitting and lava flowing through. So it's, when they call it the land of fire and ice, they're not kidding.
Yeah. So, in fact, there was a volcanic eruption a couple of years ago right there in Iceland that had most air travel to Europe halted for at least, I think, a couple of days, if I'm remembering correctly.
That was 2010. Yeah, 2010. There was a massive volcanic eruption.
But again, nobody was hurt. There wasn't any type of situation like that. But it was just, again, disruptive a little bit. So,
yeah.
What did we say earlier in this podcast about nature? You can never plan for it.
That's right.
So you spent, what was it? You said 6 days in Iceland? 6 days,
yeah.
Okay, and you had 1 day where it was a hotel, but then were the rest of it pretty much Airbnbs along the way, or how did that go?
Everything else was Airbnb, which I did book in advance. You know, if it's shoulder season, you probably could wing it a little bit. One of the things you can do that a lot of people do is they rent campers. Because of the shortage in accommodation in Iceland, it's become a thing where they rent these campers. And you know, I just can give you one called Happy Campers, but there are many out there. And I spoke to a few people doing that, and they said it was fantastic. They would pull off into a campsite, $5 a night per person. There were showers, and so if you're a little bit more adventurous, which I wouldn't be opposed to doing myself at some point, that's a fantastic option. The only problem with that is there are going to be certain roads, certain sites that you may not be able to see driving a minivan type camper. That's the drawback.
That makes sense. So you travel all the way around the south. You hit some really nice spots. Again, we'll show some people pictures of those in just a second. And then it's time to head on back to your point of origin, which is Reykjavik. Now, when you were in Reykjavik, did you do any? I know you said you're not really more of one of these pre-planning excursion people, but did you see the cathedral, or did you, did you take in a dip in the springs, anything like that while you were out there?
I did actually. Luckily, and I planned it. I had a great Airbnb that was literally a half a block from the cathedral.
Okay.
And then once you hit the cathedral, you just walk down the street and you're in the center of Reykjavik. You're in Old Town Reykjavik. So yeah, I went up the cathedral, well worth going up there. I got just some fantastic views of the entire city and port of Reykjavik. Well worth doing. The cathedral itself it's new. It was built in the 80s, but it's an architectural marvel. It's really very beautiful and iconic. And then, yeah, I did take a tour. I did a whale watching tour there.
Oh,
Wouldn't recommend it. I would, because you're not going to. It's really hard to see the whales there. I would recommend doing a whale watching trip much further north. And there's another town. Don't ask me to pronounce the name.
Yeah, they're really very long.
Yeah. Oh, they're brutal. So I would recommend doing a whale watching trip up there as opposed to Reykjavik, but I had time to kill, so I went ahead and did it. I also, I did something else in Reykjavik, and now I can't remember what it was.
Let me stop you there. I want to just ask a couple questions really quick. Did you happen to see any puffins while you were out there, by any chance?
No, it was not puffin season.
Okay, just checking. And then one thing I want to talk about is maybe while you were in Reykjavik, what the fare was like, what the food was like, because I think when most people travel, they have certain expectations on food. It's a colder climate, so my guess is that you're going to get a lot more hearty foods there, and maybe a lot of fish in Reykjavik.
It's more. Not less in the hearty,
okay.
Ironic, but more in seafood. And while it may appear pricey, it's fantastic. I could live off of Icelandic food. Arctic char, which it's similar. It's in the salmon family.
Mm-hmm.
Salmon, Icelandic lobster, which we know as langoustines. There wasn't any meal fish and chips everywhere you go. Arctic cod or Atlantic cod. Anywhere you go, there's not a bad meal to be had.
And again, service was good, I'm hoping?
Service was fantastic. And, you don't tip there. It's all inclusive. So, the service, I found it to be fantastic. The Icelandic people are very lovely. They're not incredibly warm people, but when you talk to them, they're very nice. They're very lovely and accommodating, very pleasant people.
Excellent. So now it's time to head back to the States. So
before we do that,
sure.
The Icelandic hot dog, don't ask. I don't know why. It's a thing. It's like, I don't know if it's their national dish or it's just become something they love. It's really nothing special. I promise you.
Hot dog?
But you have to eat one. And you'll eat it and go, but
it's more of a rite of passage. Is that what you're saying?
It is a rite of passage, yes.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. I will definitely look into it. But I hear the fish is, not just from you, but I've also heard the fish is actually very good from a lot of other people too. So
it's amazing. I'm a seafood lover.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in my element, but the seafood it's fresh from the hook to your plate. It's fantastic.
Excellent. Well, very good. So now we're on our way back. What was the disembarkation / return process like? What was passport control like? Are you a global entry member? I mean, those are some things I think people would want to know about.
I have TSA pre-check, but I don't have the global entry because I've never really needed it. I have something called mobile passport, which I highly recommend. It's an app. It's $14.99. You within 4 hours. So typically when you land, you fill it out. instead of filling out the customs declaration on the airplane, you do it on the app. You then go into a special line, a mobile passport line, where you go through passport control, and it took me all of 5 minutes. You scan your app onto it gives you a receipt with a QR code. You scan it, they have a machine there, they look at it, they stamp your passport, welcome home, bye-bye. Now, it's fantastic. Now, not all airports have the mobile passport. More and more are getting them. I think about 26 do, and Portland is a recent adoptee.
Okay, very nice. So no major delays. How long did it take you to get through passport control?
It might have been 2.5 minutes.
Oh,
but
that's
anywhere
fantastic.
from 2.5 to 5. Yes, but again, Portland is a small airport, but still, even with that, because of the mobile passport application, I actually got through faster than people with global entry.
Wow. Okay, that's actually really awesome.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to show people really quick, you shared some photos with me. Can you tell me a little bit about each of these 3 photos that you're sharing?
You bet. The one on the right is a place called Seljenjafoss. Wow, I pronounced it. Foss means waterfall, so you'll get a lot of place names with foss at the end, and it's not just because. It is because there are so many gorgeous waterfalls in that country. So that's the one on the right. The one on the bottom left is Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon, a fascinating place. It's another place that I actually took a tour because, I don't have my own boat. So those kinds of tours, it was about $98, well spent. It's something I would advise people not to miss. Take a Zodiac boat on this glacier lagoon in order to get very close to the glacier and see these calving glaciers. And it just happened to be a cloudy day, so we got extreme blues out of the ice, because that's really the color of ice. You don't want to go on a sunny day, everything turns white.
I'm sorry, you said a Zodiac boat?
A Zodiac, it's like a little speedboat,
okay.
A little rubber speedboat. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And where you have to hold on to the rope and as you go bouncing along. But it's because this particular glacier lagoon didn't exist 50 years ago. It's sad in a way. Climate change has affected it. It's now, the glacier has receded about 4.5 miles or 8 kilometers back from the ocean. That lagoon never used to be there.
Okay. But it's beautiful. It absolutely is lovely.
Oh, stunning. And hopefully you have a cloudy day with a little bit of rain. The rain causes the glacier to calve, which is when pieces of the ice come thundering down into the water, and it's spectacular.
Before we get into the aurora picture, I want to point out also on the picture that you took of the waterfall, it looks like at the base of the waterfall, there's a little dot of the smaller of the 2 waterfalls. I think that's actually a person.
It is.
Just to give people some perspective of the size. I left that in there
for size comparison.
Yeah.
It is massive. These are not just little streams coming off of a hill. Absolutely.
That's beautiful. And then, of course, this spectacular picture of the aurora borealis. That's just amazing. How lucky were you to get a picture of that?
I tell you, very lucky, because it had been very cloudy. I ran into some people that were there from Israel, actually. 12 days, never saw it, very disappointed. It's a complicated way to check for the aurora borealis. There's something called a KP index. You have to look at the cloud cover. There are lots of apps and Icelandic places that, websites that you go to figure this out. And I was in Reykjavik, and as luck would have it, there was a small window. I jumped in my car and I headed outside of the city, about 40 minutes, outside of the city, along with every other photographer and tour group known to man. Yeah. And and yeah, and I was able to catch it. Now the clouds were coming in, as you can see in that photograph. It wasn't a clear sky, which is normally what you see when you see photographs of the aurora. I happened to really enjoy the fact that there were some clouds giving it character. Yes. And the reds are something you don't normally see because the eye can't see the reds as much. So the clouds help that, helps the reds to come out. And that there's nothing altered in that photograph. That is straight from the camera.
It's spectacular. It's a beautiful photo, and I'm so happy you were able to get a picture of it. So just great job on that.
Thank you.
So let's talk about post-vacation. Let's talk about the takeaways that you took from this. What were some pros? What were some maybe not necessarily cons, but things that you should be aware of? And then maybe some value adds that you'd like to give to the students on this. Maybe some cost saving measures or some best practices to look at.
You bet. The pros are it is a really great place to go, especially if you are, if you like nature. I can't say enough. But even if you're not as mobile, it's a great place to go for people of any age, especially women traveling together or traveling alone. Incredibly safe. You will never feel any type of, precaution or nerves or anything at all. Just so much to see. So those are the pros. Try not to miss anything. Things to be aware of, rental cars. Rental cars book very far in advance. You do not need a four-wheel drive or an SUV unless it's winter time. Now, if you choose to, that's great, but they are going to be a lot more expensive. If you're sharing the cost, go for an SUV. I will tell you, it is the third most expensive country for gasoline. So be aware. If you get a car that takes a lot more gas or petrol, you're gonna be spending a lot of money on gasoline. My particular car that I got was not the lowest level, which is just for city driving, but the second one up, the compact, and I was getting 48 miles to the gallon. So I think I filled up twice the entire time.
Not bad.
So I highly recommend that kind of car. Be aware of the car companies. They will try and get you to buy a ton of extra insurance, and they're really, really pushy about it.
Yeah.
So be aware of that.
On that same note that you said with respect to gasoline, for my students who are uninitiated, who have not maybe been outside the country before, we're so used to seeing things here in the States being charged by the gallon for fuel. But when you go abroad, when you're purchasing what they call, as Morissa had said, petrol, oftentimes it's done by liter. And so when you're seeing something advertised at like $4 or something per liter, don't equate it to gallons. It's not the same. And you're going to end up spending more on fuel typically than you would here in the States.
Yeah, a great point, Scott. I mean, when, they do charge by the liter, not by the gallon. In England, it's a little bit different. They charge by the imperial gallon because, they're different like us. Yeah. But everywhere else is by the liter all over the world. And, it would take for a half a tank, because I didn't like to get it anywhere below a half a tank. It would cost about $45, and that's a very, very small car. So it probably had a 10-gallon tank. So, gas is very, very expensive, but you'd have to, add that into your budget and just be prepared.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that information. It's really, really great. And by the way, thank you very much for appearing on our podcast and vlog today. It was really, really wonderful to have you on. For people who want to know more about your various different journeys, or to maybe even get a glimpse at some of your other picks, what is the best site that they can reach you at?
They can reach me at my the website there that you have. There is a contact form in there, and you can just fill out the contact form if you have any questions about any of the photographs or places I've been. Like Scott said, I've been all over the world. Been traveling since I'm 18, and I'm no longer 18.
None of us are. None of us are.
Yeah. I've been traveling for multiple decades. So yeah, that is the best place for them to reach me.
Wonderful. Well, again, I thank you so much for this. And then to my students, again, thank you so much. If you have any questions or concerns, comments that you'd like to make, please let me know. I can be either reached at scott@theprofessortravel.com, or you can just go onto the website, The Professor Travel, hit the contact button, and it will send you right over to me. In the meantime, again, by the way, would you be willing to come back in the future to talk about some of your other adventures?
Absolutely. Next month, I'm on the way to Argentina and Patagonia to photograph penguins.
Oh my goodness, that's going to be such a fun adventure. Well, we will definitely look forward to hearing about that. Again, thank you so much. We look forward to it. And to my guests, to my students, make every wonderful trip that you make an excellent travel opportunity. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.